Welcome to my home.
Welcome to a very special episode of the Natural Awakening Podcast with me, your host, Wisdom, and for the first time ever, recording, a little tipsy. Thanks, and in Peter's home.
I'm a Vajrayana person, so you gotta get the guest a little beer.
A little soused.
Yep. It's a mitzvah. Did I use that right?
I'm not Jewish.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Well, I'm sure one of you will comment on the YouTube that I abused the word mitzvah.
Forgive us for our misuse of terms.
Or mitzvah. Mitzvah. Okay.
So, what I had in mind for this conversation, interview, whatever this turns out to be, I asked Gabe earlier today, Vivid Void, what would you ask Peter? What would you want us to talk about? And he set out, what is the future of Vajrayana and American culture? Easy question.
Yeah, well, I think that's hard to say. I am obviously have a very limited understanding of Vajrayana Buddhism. I think the crossroad we're at has something to do with iteratively recognizing what is cultural habit and what is integral to the actual practice. So, for instance, my teacher, Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche, he does not have an emphasis on tormas and ringing the bell and wearing, various kind of regalia. To him, really the most integral issue is non-duality. So that can go back to Buddha Shakyamuni's teachings of non-duality. So I think as long as we're co-creating methodologies and community ethical standards that support mindfulness in a way where non-duality and liberation remains the end goal, that is probably where we're headed. I also think over time the distribution of responsibility, similarly from when Tantra went from India to Tibet, there's always problems. Right? So, and then when it comes from Tibet to the West, always problems. And then when a teacher like Trungpa Rinpoche gives the Vajracharya initiation to someone to be able to give the empowerment to be a guru, big problems, I think, here in the West. So over time, we have to probably co-create ethical standards, but also understand what is transgressive to a Westerner. What is transgressive to an Indian Buddhist? Alcohol, sexual intimacy, meat eating, a lot of those things we take for granted.
So we should be celibate, vegan.
Maybe. I mean, I think that's something I think a lot about, is like Tibetans used to think of Westerners as being really immoral.
Yeah, sure.
But now you look at modern Buddhists and they are the paragon of morality, political correctness, vegetarianism.
Yeah.
So
progressive social causes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like
tight button down.
It's like brass and gold. So you could mistake being a good citizen for being actually like a good Buddhist.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think this is something we were talking about before we started recording. Most of my experience has been within Zen Sanghas, and there often, unfortunately, in my opinion, there's a conflation of being their vision of an ethically upright citizen and using Buddha Dharma as a vehicle for legitimating that and pushing that forward with taking Buddha Shakyamuni's awakening as the standard and the goal. And liberation is what this is about, not yoking the path to one's personal agenda.
Okay, so if we look at things maybe through the perspective of their sane expressions of Dharma and neurotic expressions, what would you say is the sane expression of the capacity of those type of practitioners? What is the sane expression there?
Well, and I say this as someone who largely agrees with, most of what my fellow Sangha mates in Zen Sanghas advocate for and wish for politically, socially, economically, etc. And the the sane expression of that it is to do as much good as one can within this world system as it is without trying to. There's also often like a finding of deficiency in the tradition. Well, the tradition doesn't address these sources of suffering within our current geopolitical, social, economic climate. Okay, but the existential quandary that Shakyamuni wanted to address was resolved within his own body and mind, nowhere else. And I do not think it's different for us now. And if we expend our energy and our efforts and our organizing not doing what he did and what all the masters since him have done, then we're departing from the essence of the traditions, whatever the lineage may be.
Right.
And that's unfortunate.
I can't speak for the earlier schools of Buddhism, but from the Vajrayana point of view, it's consistent. The distraction or dissociation is the source of grasping and fixation, and those are the sources then of aggression towards reality, basically. And I think so fixing that within oneself is a very noble and sane effort, basically, to wipe our own ass, learn how to tie our own shoes, make a meal for our partner, but also come from a standpoint of real awareness and real wakefulness when we're doing those things. On the broader spectrum of the vision of reality, it's very hard to control what other people are doing.
I'd say impossible. Actually impossible.
Yeah,
it just doesn't work.
Unless you're like literally binding them or imprisoning them. And even then
That's an outer form of control.
Exactly.
You just, yeah.
So I think these efforts, which is part of the thing that's going on in Vajrayana Buddhism, which ends up being kind of like a fundamentalist view. When we look to Gabe's point, the interesting thing to me, and I think to you also, is the yogic tradition of Vajrayana Buddhism as being sort of an outsider school of self-inquiry and behavioral. And that behavior being sort of like a couldn't carelessness. And then when it gets institutionalized into these monastic environments, that is where I think Westerners gravitate towards. We always want this institutional little pat on the head, oh, you're doing the right thing. I think
we're very used to that from our education, universities, credentialism.
Our parents,
yep.
Even more essentially. And so there's nothing essentially wrong with that, but I think that can be ground for like a neurotic relationship to the teachings, where you're trying to impose this view of fruitional state with the messiness of relative experience. And I think maybe the neurotic expression of the Vajrayana Buddhist is trying to make the relative world look like the formless, structureless, unborn, fruitional state. It is a state. It's not, if it is fruitional, it's still not non-duality. And that imposition and the aggression behind trying to like enforce that's where we get this real emphasis on maybe non-duality, being a good person, being a limousine liberal or Democrat or whatever it is, and just being a good little girl or boy or a good they. So we're never going to resolve this issue, but I think as Vajrayana people, the only thing I'm really concerned about is the emphasis on non-duality and what we would call merely knowing, the practice of, like the foundational practice of Dzogchen, deity yoga, completion practices, just having some awareness, basically. It's not rocket science.
Although, we were talking earlier about the stunning complexity and sophistication of some of the methods that you'll find in Vajrayana. Salom, Tigle, there's a whole panoply of, it's almost like cathedral-like complexity to some of the methods, which to people initially can either be a source of kind of fascination and fixation. I know people who have become fascinated with the methods and the mythology and the iconography of Vajrayana and actually do very little practice and don't experience that much benefit,
right?
Which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I think for our inquiry about these topics, I don't think my teacher would necessarily agree with this, but we can use developmental modeling to figure out probably what is appropriate for us to practice. You know, if we're more drawn to an institutional style of Buddhism, great. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. I think for us to make the assessment of where we are developmentally, and that's where a teacher is really helpful, is to like assess, okay, should this person be seeing some sort of like objectively material deity shining white, red, and blue light into their body, or is this person developmentally able to act as if that they are the deity without turning into some sort of cosmic egoic monster? Or is this participant able to have a more integral level, I guess if we want to use Wilber's parlance or spiral dynamics, and be able to do these practices but also be engaged in the world as a Vajrayana Buddhist and be transgressive in their work to not only liberate their own neurotic tendencies, but to engage wholeheartedly in the stream of their experience without exception. So there's all kinds of ways to view, and I think the more Byzantine the model, the psychological model, probably the less inclusive the person's developmental plateau might be, or center of gravity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So as you know, as you rise up through the lower tantras and then into Mahayoga or generation stage and then completion stage and then Dzogchen or Mahamudra, it gets simpler.
Yep.
So the generation stage is easily the most complex, and it actually is kind of modeled on our own psychology, which is also incredibly complex.
So staying on this generation stage, Mahayoga, which for those who probably most people listening to this will have come across a lot of these terms already, but for someone who knows something about Buddhism, what is generation stage practice?
That's a big question.
That's a big question. And Peter is also going to be leading a course on this soon, introducing that whole method. So
yeah. So I would just, for maybe to have a practical standpoint on it, we could use the modeling of the Guhya Garbha Tantra, or the magical matrix. And so basically at a very simple kindergarten level, what we would say is we're generating a deity as a replacement for our own ignorance or passion-driven or aggression-driven sense of identity. And so the nice thing, or the upgrade, so to speak, of the Mahayogas is that this replacement never takes a side with open luminosity or open experiencing, nor does it materialize itself as some sort of concrete, significant, solid self. Unlike our unquestioned belief in our own identity, if we get insulted by someone, there's nothing more solid or triggering than, oh, my identity has been threatened here. I need to defend myself. So if you're enacting this sort of like deity form, or if you see the world as being a expression of the world of deities, it kind of like doesn't give you as much ground to take a stand and harm or create harm for yourself or create harm for others, because the deity is by definition representative of what is already true, and you don't have to take it as being absolutely true, because that is grounds for the nightmare of psychosis. Exactly.
Well, which a slightly different form of the psychosis that most people are in most of the time, taking this and their their other fabricated identity as real and solid and fixed.
Yeah. Yeah, so Buddhism in a nutshell to me is it's there, but it's not there. Can you deal with that? And to take the whole, I'm not going to call it a metaphor nor a mythology, but the method of the Mahayoga is everything is a deity. Your seeing, your hearing, your taste, your skin, water, other creatures are all deity. And so you can begin to train yourself to see the world as a sublimely organized mandala of safety And, you know, there's
Play.
Play, thank you. Lila.
Pure vision is
Yeah,
what.
pure vision.
What's the? I've never actually heard the Tibetan properly pronounced. For pure vision.
I'm like the worst.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
It's Dhamma.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Nong is vision.
No. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when we say, or my teacher would say it more like hung. So, you know, a horse sees this can of soda a certain way. You see this as a can of soda. An ant sees this as something very different. So these, this vision is actually the way we would be organizing our psychological reality.
According to karma.
Right, according to karma. So we want to leverage that to our advantage. And so using the deity yogas or visualization practices, you know, and I really like Donald Hoffman's work, and he talks a lot about how vision and cognition in general are conditioned by very base survival level ways of seeing the world. So that's a really rich territory for us to transform that, those cognitive patterns, and maybe turn them into something that is a little more fluid, a little more open, diaphanous, less of a cocoon of self-referentiality. So we use the deity yoga not as a way to worship something, but a way to see the world as sublime, and both the deity and yourself are equivalent. There's no difference.
And one interesting facet of deity yoga, especially, I mean, well, all forms, but they kind of, in the iconography and in some of the practice forms, they key into some of these really basic primal ways of seeing in the world, the keys, the triggers. So there's eroticism and violence and horror,
Right.
and anger and you know, sublime beauty. All of these kind of heightened perceptions and aesthetic modes are represented in the form of the deity that you're relating to dyadically or in various forms, or generating yourself.
Right.
So I think there's potency there. For me, as a practitioner who's taken up not so extensively, but taken up some of these practices, it's gotten access and exposed a lot of conditioning around eroticism, around anger, around all of these different facets of my conditioning that were not actually touched or were not surfaced in some, like jhana practice, for instance. A lot of that just didn't come up.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an appealing way to integrate disowned energies, whether that is eroticism or sexual aggression. For some people, doing a wrathful practice would be a way to take ownership of healthy masculine or aggression. I think especially when men or masculine or male identifying people start doing these practices, they initially go into a very feminine, passive phase. And that means they're probably pushing out of conscious awareness more healthful expressions of aggression. And so sometimes, or if it's someone who's identified with more feminine qualities, it might be healthful for them to feel that like
Power and
the power of like setting a boundary, but doing it in a kind way instead of maybe a more passive aggressive way or a reactive way. So maybe, you know, working with these deities, they should, from a Campbellian or like a mythological view, resonate with the energies of the organs of the body. And from the completion phase or the later more yogic strands of these tantric practices, those energies are consonant and resonant with very subtle, energetic, you could almost call them substances, like Kundalini has a masculine and a feminine, you know, a solar and a lunar expression. And so these deities in a more secret or what's a word for secret that's not secret?
Concealed
Concealed way. a lot of these deities are just pointing to energies that are already translating reality and actually are creating reality. So when you're doing the deity yoga, you're actually trying to relate to reality, and then through the practices you dismantle each seeming layer and get a little closer to the truth. And like what you and I were talking about, it should be a process. The journey is the enjoyable thing. You know, dipping your toe into formless, open, radical, pants-shitting awareness, that's really great sometimes, but you also, like, to the point of the Zen tradition, you gotta go do the dishes, chop the logs, carry the water. And so that's what's great about the tantric methodologies is like, okay, yeah, that's great you had that, but someone like my teacher is very unimpressed with any sort of opening, right? Because you're gonna try to institutionalize it. Your ego is going to take credit almost instantaneously.
Look back, whoa, look at that thing I had, whoa,
right.
Whoa.
So, and I think that's what a lot of the people you and I work with is sort of like they're seeking ways to integrate the openings from traumatic experience, psychedelic openings, making love to someone, winning an award, you know, all these kind of like seemingly transcendent peak experiences. That's I think the value of Tantra in the West is like we can integrate those in a more skillful way. Right now, I think we're just making these really harsh oscillations between big openings and then depression, anxiety, traumatic organization. And I think just going a little slower, keeping the bike upright is going to serve the modern practitioner really well. And that's not really emphasized in Eastern tantric traditions too much. Therapy in general is not regarded as it. Like you wouldn't find a Tibetan who's gonna go sit on a couch and complain about their mother, perhaps. Not like a 19th century tantric adept.
No,
that's not. It's just unseemly to do something. And people like you and I, it's like we spend thousands of dollars paying therapists to hear us complain about our parents, probably. I don't want to speak for you.
No, most of the therapy sessions I've gone to were actually paid for by my parents, and I did actually while I was still young because I was so depressed.
Yeah.
And then,
can you help him?
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. And then, you know, surprise, surprise, I drop out and think I want to be a monk for a while and dive into practice. Well, yeah.
That seems to be the logical thing because you're coming from a place of like, okay, well, this familiar identity is problematic.
Yeah.
What can I do to liberate myself from it? Maybe I'm
absolutely. I mean, that is totally my life history. Is I was miserably, horribly depressed for years and years and years, and it's like, well, I come across Buddha Dharma. It's like the self is the problem. I'm like, yes, it is. I am the problem. And
did any unhealthful expressions of aggression contribute to the depression, or maybe repressed?
For sure.
Isn't that the like therapeutic? Like depression is sometimes an expression of unspoken aggression, or
retrospectively, I mean, my interpretation may change over time, but retrospectively, yeah, like my severe depression was like an internalized, repressed anger towards my parents, towards the world, towards everything and everyone around me.
Yeah, and
that was intolerable, and there was no healthy outlet for it, and there was no guidance for me at that time, and so that just contracted, turned inwards, and I just submerged in depression with spikes of anxiety and like flashes of rage. And then that took on a religious zealous ambition.
Yeah, so now you have a more healthful expression of that. Maybe like
I hope so.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot of active libidinal energy, basically, and it needs to go somewhere, and that's up to you to channel that in ways you find constructive.
Which now is I feel very grateful now to have had residential practice experience with teachers who recognized where I was and were able to help me, and ongoing work with teachers who meet me where I'm at.
Gotcha.
And have very, very grateful.
Lovely.
some people had some questions. Maybe it's a good time to turn to some of those. Is there anything in what we've said so far?
Questions.
Yeah? Is there anything so far that we haven't fully gotten to or you want to circle back to?
I would just say something you and I touched on earlier in our exchange is this question of transmission in the tantric world comes up quite frequently. And I want to suggest for the audience's spirit of inquiry. So Tantra suggests, a stream of transmission, basically. And so I think you receive these abhisheka, which are also known as empowerments, or you receive other sorts of like reading transmissions. That's what keeps the whole tradition alive, is basically interpersonal exchange and sharing of information. And I think we should all be inquiring. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh, okay, well, then we don't need our monastic institutions.
Wild West, anything goes.
Yeah, that's not what I'm saying. I think the monastic institutions and the Kenpos and these Geshe type people who are doctorates in Buddhist philosophy, they are so integral to the not only the knowledge base, but the performance of ritual and transmission. But we also need to relax a little bit. And it shouldn't be, I think, who you get empowerments from. Traditionally, that stuff's all secret in the first place. So trying to be a dharma cop or being harmful towards other practitioners because you don't necessarily agree with their standpoint or their teacher, that is a breakage of our pledge to basically do no harm. So I would just say all of us, it's so easy to shit on other people's, where they get their transmissions or how they get those kind of things. I think we should just keep our own porch clean, tie our own shoes, wipe our own ass, and take really good care of ourselves in what can be a very predatory world of spiritual instruction, and do our best to take care of each other and ask the hard questions, but do it in a kind way. Because I think it's really easy to just say, oh, your teacher's garbage, or oh, you work with a Western teacher, that's not real Dharma.
Yeah.
That's not true. That comes up a lot in social media, and I don't think social media is where we're gonna figure that out. I think this kind of thing is where we're gonna figure it out, is like all working together to figure out what is more important is that we're meeting our intentions and goals. What is less important is trying to reify or solidify the book section in the New Age bookshop and say, oh no, this is Buddhist Tantra, all these like books from Snowline and Shambhala. They might be, but for a lot of the modern practitioners, they might not be, because a lot of people don't want to jump through those hoops of 100,000 prostrations and mandala offerings and the whole Namdro cycle. So I would just like to offer that. It's like, be nice. We'll figure it out.
You're making me reflect on some of my recent posting history where I've been taking out some of that libidinal energy and aggression.
Yeah.
Shitting on some, well, anyway.
Well, I'm not saying I don't do it. I'm saying I'm like talking to myself. Thank you. It's my Catholic upbringing. Thank you for hearing my confession.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, yeah. But it is so interesting, this tendency among masters of the past or current living teachers to just viciously attack each other.
Yeah, it's traditional.
Yeah, it's a long tradition of contemplatives taking pot shots at each other.
Like, I don't want to be too technical, but the Gelugpa and the Nyingmapas have been going at each other for, hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Nyingmas are known as lazy, alcoholic, Dzogchen worshippers, and then the Nyingmapas will say, oh, you Gelugpas, you just stick to keep your nose
Dusty
in your
books.
books and stay out of our business, So it's like, it's a long tradition of debate.
Yeah.
leading to various insights, but mostly just leading to sectarianism.
Yeah.
Which doesn't seem that constructive to me.
Doesn't.
Especially in the West, where we barely have any understanding of what they're bringing over here. And then we have the unfortunate ethical transgressions of certain Vajrayana, Zen, and Theravadan communities. So, you know, that lastly to Gabe's point, bringing up-to-date ethical standards into our sanghas, I think is really important.
Yeah.
And I almost think that should be the where we should emphasize a lot of our inquiry.
Around that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna have a lot more experiences of openness if you have your life together and you're not walking in your sangha having real negative vibes with your teacher or some person in the sangha you slept with, or your teacher's like taking money from people in a unethical way. That just breeds like a environment of paranoia, and we have enough of that in our political system. We don't need to drag that into our sanghas. Yeah, I'm rambling.
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, it's if you are rambling, it's a good ramble. Let's turn to some questions that folks sent in. A fun one.
Okay.
The possible connection between deity yoga and superheroes.
Oh. Yeah, Jeffrey Kripal, who's the religious studies chair at Rice University, writes a lot about this topic, right? And you're probably familiar with his work.
I know his name. I haven't actually read much.
Oh, you'd love his work, I think. And he writes books about anomalous experience and the cultural eddies and habits that basically frame the expression of an anomalous experience. So he uses metaphors like alienation, for instance, and that or radiation, and then you get the X-Men because they're all a product of like the nuclear era paranoia.
Right.
And then you get alienation, which may be an expression of anomalous experience through the lens of UAPs. And you know, some of those expressions are superheroes. You know, and it's sort of like one, I think, really fulcrumatic comment he makes is that Superman and Clark Kent, which are two like kind of personas, it's important that you have a Clark Kent. You know, so yes, you can be this sort of like supernormal deity as Superman obviously is. He has his psychological vulnerability, his kryptonite, right? His core vulnerabilities. He's never going to get rid of those. He works as best as he can with that core vulnerability. But he doesn't want to be Superman all the time. You got to have some Clark Kentness. So I think there's really something salient there for the modern practitioner of this, again, oscillation between relative experiencing and fruitional or siddhi strewn experiencing, not taking a side with either expression. And I think part of my course will be an exploration of sort of like these accoutrement or expressions of the deity. You know, you can use the Sanskrit word guna. Are they relevant to us? Do we need deities that are holding cell phones? Do we need deities that have a phone charger? Or, you know, and you see this in The Watchmen too, the great blue deity, and he has sort of like this undertow of being expression of nuclear energy, and so I think it's worthy of exploration. My teacher disagrees. He feels as though the deities of medieval India and certainly the 10th to 15th century Tibet are the most precise expressions. I disagree. I was brought up in the West. I think we can do something that's just a touch more relevant to our day-to-day lives. But I think leveraging the map to our advantage is beneficial than trying to just recreate the map.
Right.
So I think we should leverage what's already there and see what's working and see what's not. Do we need the 4 heads and 16 arms? I don't know.
I mean, if you're into that, that's pretty cool. what I've worked with has not. It's been less extravagant, but I'm very fond of thousand armed Chenrezig.
Yeah, it's a beautiful practice.
So personally, I find a lot of resonance with some of the traditional iconography in the Zen tradition in East Asian Vajrayana, which I have some experience with, and in the Tibetan Vajrayana.
Yeah.
Some of it, and some of it just leaves me completely cold,
Right.
and I feel no connection with it all.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's great if one does have a connection with the traditional iconography, and because then the infrastructure is there for you. You can just plug in.
Yeah.
And if you don't, it can be awkward. And I know people who have spent years, even decades, doing practices that they feel no resonance with. It's just because it's what their teacher told them to do, and it's lifeless. It has no benefit or effect for them.
Right.
It's just kind of rote repetition of,
Yeah. Well, I think something that's missing, and I'll get to my point here, but when you receive a Mahamudra or a Dzogchen teaching, it's usually through the auspices of a deity cycle, like a treasure cycle. And so many times you'll get the Dzogchen instruction through the auspices of the Vajrakilaya or the Tara or a Guru Yoga like Vimaladrup, which is the Malamitra, whatever it may be. And so to answer the question about superheroes, as long as the superhero can represent three basic layers of understanding, which is the appearance, energy, purity of the deity as it appears, if you can embody that and then one step later distill that into prana, the air, channels, the veins, and the kundalini itself, or tigle, and then lastly the Dzogchen teaching, the formless teaching of like mere awareness, and then seeing the world as an expression of that mere awareness. Those are the layers I think that are overlooked in the popular discussion about how Dzogchen is transmitted. My experience is always transmitted through the auspices of a sadhana or a deity yoga. And then the teacher unpacks the deity yoga through three fundamental vehicles: Mahayoga generation, completion yogas, which include Tumo, dream yoga, karma mudra, things like that. Lastly, the formless practices of Dzogchen and Mahamudra.
As an integrated system.
Right.
I know a lot of people who have had contact with Dzogchen teaching or Mahamudra teaching, and they receive some of those instructions independent of any Mahayoga, any Anu Yoga, or even foundation in Nundro or just basic Shamatha Vipassana.
It's very popular right now to do it that way.
And almost, I asking those practitioners, well, okay, what is your experience of awareness? How's that going?
Yeah.
It's not going. It's like you're given, and this is also true in a Zen context. In my experience in sanghas, there's a lot of bandying about of pretty phrases about the mirror-like nature of the mind. Great.
Yeah.
And a total neglect of the actual foundations that allow those direct, unelaborate instructions to penetrate and take liberative effect for someone, which is, again, unfortunate.
I think what has been impressed upon me by my teachers is just having an appreciation that you're receiving the teachings, and then the rest works itself out. The Dzogchen teachings communicate that everything is already perfect. Okay. I very rarely, maybe on one or two occasions, run into someone who no longer has a self-reference. And I've met a lot of practitioners who complain and bitch a lot. Which means to me, unless they're doing it as like, oh, this is just the play of my Rigpa. It's usually not that. So the supports of the Anu yogas, working with the channels, breath work. So as I was saying, enough of you, Wystan. As I was saying,
Do we hit record? Is it recording?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so if you're going to use a comic book, then it should serve the pedagogical function, the transcendent function, right? You can't just use a comic book. You could.
Superman Yidam, sure.
Yeah.
Or Wonder Woman Yidam.
But it should also reveal transparency, and it should reveal these workings of the subtle body and not be incompatible. Nor should it be incompatible with knowing as luminosity, which is the teaching of Dzogchen, or the wisdom. So as long as the Yidam or deity that the Chila or the practitioner is using conforms to the necessary functions, I think it's not a huge problem. I might go to some Vajrayana for saying such things, but the Indian yoga deities started somewhere. Right?
A lot of them are incorporated Hindu deities, or
right.
Shaiva or Shakta deities that were incorporated into a Buddhist pantheon that were reappropriated and put to purpose in Buddhist Tantra.
And I think this is where Kripal's work is really interesting, because he's basically saying your anomalous experience is going to be organized around the filters of your cultural conditioning.
Sure, yeah.
And is your cultural conditioning include green Tara? Maybe. And then you see people who have ayahuasca visions and they're seeing maybe a more jungle kind of deity, or the Mother Earth deity. That seems to be almost programmed into the compound. I'm not really sure. But it's still expressed in a way that's understandable to the human psyche. So those are the questions. I think there's no resolution to this, of course, but those are the questions we should ask ourselves as we investigate. Is a comic book character or a deity I invent going to serve my effort to liberate myself from aggression towards reality?
Yeah, the teachers that I've worked with and I'm now working with in the Zen and in Dzogchen and Vajrayana lineages, there's an immense respect and fidelity in some cases to the traditional forms, but also whatever adaptation is made, if it's in the service of actually bringing people to the fruition, great. And this is very much the Zen perspective. And there's been like incredible mutation within Zen as it moved into China and into Japan, adapting itself to cultural forms. The important thing is liberation and keeping that stream of transmission alive from generation to generation, and forms change. Yeah.
I mean, I think Trungpa Rinpoche tried some of these with the Dorje Kasung, like his little
It was a pretty big deal.
his army of Dharma protector types, and he was trying, and I was talking today to a colleague about, context is important too. A lot of those of us who are practitioners, I think, should also be practicing art and poetry and honing our ability to communicate elegantly and kindly in order to transmit these teachings in a meaningful way. So it's not just about having experience of wisdom, but it's also about being able to, the skillful means and compassion to frame those in a way where people can actually utilize them. And lastly, if you do have an anomalous breakthrough, oftentimes someone like Jingme Lingpa or Longchenpa, or someone who is having visions of gurus and deities, they create these treasure teachings for us to sort of emulate their insight and emulate their vision. And it's almost like we're practicing a simulacrum. We're practicing a simulation of someone else's opening experience in hopes that it will have the same impact on us. So to concretize the deity or the form as having some sort of ultimate meaning is, I believe, like a form of spiritual materialism or fundamentalism. So yeah, fetishism is a good word too. So I think we have to be flexible. It's a big topic. To me, it's the biggest topic in Tantra.
Yeah.
So we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
It's an ongoing project.
Yeah.
Is there anything? I believe we should be wrapping up. Is there anything final that you want to leave folks on? We got a lot more questions that we didn't get to. Maybe that's just an invitation for round 2 at some point.
I would love a round 2. I would love as many rounds as possible, and I just want to communicate that I think it's important for all of us as a collective of good-hearted, well-intentioned practitioners to be really investigating the teachings we're receiving and really investigating whether or not we're willing to install these teachings into our bones and, live that lifestyle. And it doesn't mean you have to live this kind of institutionally sanctioned way of doing it. It really means using every opportunity you can to recognize that you're aware. So you're acting from choice instead of compulsion. Deity yoga is one of the amazing expressions of Himalayan Buddhism that I think, and Shingon, and also the tantric forms in Japan. And I think it's really useful. If it doesn't appeal to you, there's all kinds of other ways to do these practices that will hopefully help you stabilize your experience of just knowing, just being aware, not getting captured by familiar formulas and familiar patterns of experience that really have brought us a lot of suffering. Those are the demons. Those are the obstacle makers, our own mind. And so to think, the obstacle maker maybe takes the form of a demon or something like that. Oftentimes these stories are just reflective of our own capacity to undermine and sabotage our own good intentions to awaken. So Deity yoga is just one way to formalize or to express these ineffable and dynamic energies of the psyche and the spirit as they appear, and learn to consciously work with those energies instead of the alternative where they're kind of like running the show from under the hood and basically surfacing as symptoms. So we want to have a conscious relationship with our core vulnerabilities. We don't want them to be operating in a way where we feel as though we have to constellate around them, and then basically our whole life ends up being this dance of avoiding our core panic. When we manifest as a deity that has all the money we need, all the filial support, all the blessings of a lineage, we feel much more confident about addressing these core vulnerabilities. And when I say a core vulnerability, I'm talking about the formless panic that is enlightenment.
Oh shit, no grounds, oh god.
Right? From ego's whole job is to keep you from waking up. And so it's going to regard these core vulnerabilities or this openness as a panic. Not for everyone, but for many of us who, maybe have traumatic organization, had challenging childhoods, have nervous systems that are quite tender from personal work or interpersonal friction. So we want to, address these things in the most skillful way possible. Deity yoga is one way to do it. You are obviously really well schooled in the Zen tradition of addressing this formless vulnerability, and I think there's so many roads.
I've been bullheaded and pushed through. I wouldn't say I'm well schooled compared to my teachers,
Okay.
but that's a high bar.
There's a lot of merit in that, though.
Yeah.
I think a charlatan, in my teacher's parlance, is just someone who communicates these teachings as though it's going to improve your life.
I can say with confidence that pursuing this as fanatically as possible has completely destroyed my life for periods of time.
Right.
In the best way. Mm-hmm. No regrets.
Yeah. So as long as our aim is the non-duality of relative experience and fruitional experience, I think we're okay.
This is not a life improvement project. If you approach it in that way, you're going to be severely disappointed.
What he said.
Cool. Okay.
That was good.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Peter.
Strong ending. I'm sure you could pluck something out of all this.